At 11:51 p.m. on New Year's Eve, the champagne flutes were raised. My father, James, tapped his spoon against the crystal, silencing the crowded dining room. He looked the picture of a benevolent patriarch in his tuxedo, surrounded by the luxury catering I had secretly paid for. He smiled at the guests, then turned his cold, blue eyes directly to me. "To new beginnings," he announced, his voice smooth as velvet. "And to shedding dead weight. Olivia, you are a burden to this family. You have until morning to get out." The room went dead silent. He smiled, sipping the vintage wine he couldn't afford, completely unaware that he had just evicted his only source of income. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a single tear. I simply nodded, stood up, and walked out of the dining room while the guests were still processing the cruelty of my father's toast. My mother, Angela, didn't even look up from her plate. She was too busy signaling the servers to pour more champagne, desperate to smooth over the awkward silence with expensive bubbles. I went upstairs to the room I had paid to renovate 3 times. I pulled my suitcase from the closet and started packing. I didn't pack everything, just the essentials. My laptop. My documents. The hard drive containing 5 years of financial records. My movements were efficient, mechanical. I wasn't a daughter leaving home. I was a logistics manager closing down a failed warehouse. My bedroom door creaked open. It was Sydney, my 17-year-old sister. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. She looked like she was waiting for the shouting match that never came. "Olivia," she whispered, closing the door behind her. "What are you doing? Where are you going to go?" "I'm leaving, Sid," I said, zipping up the suitcase. Just like he asked. "But who's going to pay for everything?" she asked, her voice trembling. She knew. She was the only one who truly knew the architecture of our family's survival. She had seen the bank alerts on my phone. She knew who really signed the checks. "Not me," I said. I walked over and hugged her tight. She felt fragile, shaking against me. "You keep your head down. Finish your semester. I'll come back for you. I promise." I walked out of the front door past the valets parking the cars I leased. I called an Uber and had it take me to the downtown Hyatt. I didn't look back at the house. I didn't feel a pang of nostalgia. I felt the cold, hard clarity of a contract being terminated for cause. I checked into the room at 11:45 p.m. The city outside was alive with noise, firecrackers popping in the distance, people cheering for the new year. Inside, it was silent. I sat at the generic wooden desk, opened my laptop, and logged into the master banking portal. The screen illuminated the dark room. There it was, the ledger of my servitude. The mortgage on the colonial house in the suburbs. The lease payments for my father's Range Rover and my mother's Lexus. The platinum membership dues for the country club they visited daily to maintain appearances. The credit card bill for the very dinner they were currently eating. Total monthly output, $5,800. I hover my mouse over the Cancel Autopay button for the mortgage. My finger hesitated. For years, I had wondered why I did it, why I stayed, why I poured my salary into a black hole of gratitude-free consumption. It wasn't love. I realized that now. It was a prison without bars. Psychologists call it learned helplessness, the conditioning that makes a prisoner stay even when the cell door is wide open. I call it the invisible chain. They had trained me since childhood to believe that my only currency was utility, that my only right to exist in their world was purchased with checks. They had convinced me that if I stopped paying, I would simply cease to matter. I had been paying rent for the space I occupied in their hearts, never realizing the room was empty. Tonight, James had handed me the key to my own shackles. He thought he was discarding a burden. He didn't realize he was cutting the only wire keeping the lights on. The clock on my laptop screen flickered. 12 o'clock midnight. "Happy New Year," I whispered to the empty room. I clicked. Mortgage. Cancelled. Lexus lease. Cancelled. Range Rover lease. Cancelled. Country club membership. Cancelled. Joint credit card. Frozen. I watched the confirmation bars turn green, one by one. It was the most beautiful fireworks show I had ever seen. I closed the laptop, lay down on the crisp hotel sheets, and for the first time in 5 years, I fell into a sleep that was absolute and dreamless. The sun hit the hotel carpet at 10 a.m. sharp. It was quiet. Usually, on New Year's Day, I would be in the kitchen, scraping dried brie off fine china while my mother complained about the caterer's lack of vision. Today, I sat in a white robe, drinking coffee I didn't have to brew, staring at a spreadsheet. I've always been good with data. It's why I'm a high-level freelance designer. I understand structure. I understand the architecture of things. And now, in the cold light of the morning, I decided to perform a forensic audit on my own life. I opened the file labeled Family Support. I had created it 3 years ago, initially just to track expenses for tax purposes. Now, it looked like the autopsy report of a crime. Let's look at the assets. My father, James. He hasn't held a W-2 job since 2018. He calls himself a business consultant, which, as far as I can tell, involves drinking scotch at noon and critiquing other people's success on LinkedIn. He wears Italian loafers and talks loudly about market volatility, but he hasn't generated a single dollar of profit in half a decade. My mother, Angela. She claims she manages the estate. An estate that has a housekeeper, a landscaper, and a pool boy, all paid for by the ghost and machine me. She treats the world like an audience, performing the role of the weary aristocrat, too burdened by her own refinement to work a register or answer a phone. I scrolled down to the expense column. November. Range Rover lease, $1,200. Auto repair, $3,200. I remembered that repair. Dad had hit a pylon while parking at the club. He told me it was essential maintenance, implying the car would explode if I didn't wire the cash immediately. Meanwhile, I drive a 2016 Honda Civic with a dent in the passenger door that I can't afford to fix because I was too busy paying for his heated leather seats. July, client dinner, $800. That was the night they went to Le Bernardin. They posted photos for weeks. #blessed. #success. I wasn't in the photos. I was in my apartment, eating instant ramen, working a freelance rush job until 3 a.m. just to cover the overdraft fee that dinner triggered. They didn't just take my money, they took my trajectory. Every dollar that went into their image was a dollar stolen from my own life. My down payment for a house? Gone into their country club dues. My master's degree fund? Evaporated into mom's seasonal wardrobe updates. I had convinced myself it was temporary, that they were just having a rough patch, that I was the good daughter, the safety net. But looking at 5 years of data, the trend line was flat. This wasn't a slump. It was a business model. And the product was me. I was the silent investor in a failing startup that refused to pivot. You are a burden. The words echoed in the quiet room. The audacity was breathtaking. I wasn't a burden. I was the load-bearing wall. I was the host organism. They had evicted the only thing standing between them and poverty, and they did it to look powerful in front of their friends. I closed the laptop. The anger that washed over me wasn't hot or messy. It was cold. It was the precise, sterile anger of an auditor finding a massive discrepancy in the books. I rubbed my eyes, trying to summon regret, but there was only clarity. This wasn't a breakdown. It was a balance sheet correction. I picked up the hotel phone and called the front desk. I'd like to extend my stay, I said, my voice steady. Indefinitely. I had plenty of money now. After all, as of midnight last night, I had just given myself a $5,800 a month raise. 2 weeks later, the grace period ended. In the financial world, 2 weeks is the standard buffer before a missed payment triggers a notification. In my family, it was the exact amount of time it took for the delusion to crack. I hadn't heard a word from my parents. No apologies. No, please come home. Just a stubborn, stony silence. They were waiting for me to break. They assumed I was sitting in a friend's spare room, miserable, waiting for permission to return to my post as the family aim. They didn't know I was in a suite overlooking the harbor, eating room service and watching their credit score plummet in real time. Then the notification started. Not from the bank, but from Sydney. They got the letters. Her text read, "Dad is screaming at the mailman." The foreclosure warning. The notice of default on the Range Rover. The polite but firm letter from the country club regarding outstanding dues. I waited for my phone to ring. I expected James to call, raging. I expected Angela to weep into the receiver. But the call never came. Instead, my Aunt Patricia called me. "Olivia," she said, her voice dripping with that specific brand of poisonous concern unique to Southern matriarchs. "I just got off the phone with your mother. I am appalled." "Hello, Aunt Patricia," I said, keeping my voice even. "Appalled by what, exactly?" "That you would steal from them," she hissed. "Angela told me everything. How you emptied their retirement accounts before you left. How you siphoned off their savings to fund some lavish lifestyle in the city while they can barely buy groceries. How could you? After everything they did for you?" I didn't interrupt. I let her spew the venom. It was fascinating in a clinical sort of way. They hadn't admitted they were broke. They hadn't admitted they were being evicted. Instead, they had constructed a narrative where they were the victims of a grand larceny. "Is that what they said?" I asked. "They're heartbroken, Olivia. James is talking to the church elders about it. They're asking for a special collection this Sunday because their wayward daughter robbed them blind." I hung up. I didn't argue. Arguing with a narrative that well-constructed is useless. Instead, I opened my laptop and created a new folder, defamation. Sydney sent me an audio file 10 minutes later. It was a recording from the kitchen. She planned this. My father's voice was slurred, likely from the scotch he hadn't paid for. "She's been skimming off the top for years. That's how she affords those clothes. That's why she left. She took the nest egg and ran." "What will we tell the neighbors when the cars are taken?" My mother wept. "We tell them the truth," James snapped. "That our daughter is a thief." I listened to the clip 3 times. It wasn't just a lie. It was a psychological defense mechanism. I realized then that I was witnessing a textbook case of the delusion of the empty wallet. Psychologists refer to it as a narcissistic injury, but in my family's case, it was simpler. They had confused having with being. For James and Angela, their entire identity, their being, was constructed exclusively from what they had. The cars, the club, the house, these weren't just things. They were the structural integrity of their personalities. They were hollow shells, kept upright only by the pressure of money. When I cut the cash flow, I didn't just make them poor, I made them non-existent. They couldn't admit they were broke because that would mean admitting they were failures. So, to preserve their egos, they had to invent a villain. They had to believe I stole the money. It was the only way their worldview made sense. If I was a thief, they were still rich victims, martyrs to a cruel child. It allowed them to keep the aristocrat mask on, even as the repo man idled down the street. It was pathetic. It was delusional. And it was dangerous. They weren't just smearing my name to save face. They were soliciting donations based on a felony accusation. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal. I felt the cold resolve of a prosecutor who had just been handed the smoking gun. They wanted to make this a public battle. They wanted to involve the church, the family, the community. Fine. I forwarded Sydney's audio file to my desktop. Then I picked up my phone and dialed Chloe. "Hey," I said when she answered. "I need you to draft a cease and desist. And Chloe, make it lethal." Chloe's office was on the 42nd floor, a fortress of glass and steel that smelled of espresso and billable hours. It was the exact opposite of my parents' house. There was no clutter here, no pretense, no fake heirlooms gathering dust. Just clean lines and the cold, hard comfort of a law. I sat across from her, reviewing the cease and desist letter she had drafted. It was a masterpiece of legal aggression. It outlined every instance of defamation, every lie told to the church board, every slanderous text message Sydney had intercepted. It demanded an immediate retraction and a public apology, or we would proceed with a civil suit for damages. "It's aggressive," Chloe said, sliding a pen across the mahogany desk. "But with narcissists you have to be. If you give them an inch of gray area, they'll build a castle on it. This draws a line in the sand." I don't want an apology, I said, picking up the pen. I just want them to stop. I want to be a ghost to them. I signed the document. The scratch of the pen against the paper felt final. It was the professional escalation I needed. I was no longer the daughter, hiding in a hotel room. I was a litigant. We'll have a process server deliver it to the rental property they're eyeing, Chloe said, organizing the file. We'll also send a copy to the church elders, just so they know the theft narrative is legally contested. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my chest. We were handling this. It was business. Then my phone buzzed against the table. It wasn't a text. It wasn't a call. It was a priority notification from the credit monitoring service I had signed up for the night I left. New inquiry detected. American Express Platinum. I frowned. I hadn't applied for a new card. I picked up the phone and tapped the notification. The details populated the screen. The application had been submitted 10 minutes ago. The applicant's name was Olivia Marie Vance. The social security number was mine. The income listed was mine. But the billing address was my parents' house. What is it? Chloe asked, her lawyer instinct sharpening instantly. Someone just applied for a platinum card in my name, I said, my voice flat. With a $50,000 limit. Chloe spun her monitor around and typed furiously. Check the email associated with the application. I scrolled down. It wasn't my email. It was angelavanceevents@gmail.com. My mother. She hadn't just applied. She had forged my digital signature. I stared at the screen, waiting for the hurt to come, waiting for the sting of maternal betrayal. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt a cold, clinical fascination. They were drowning. The lease payments were overdue, the mortgage was in default, and the country club had likely revoked their privileges. In their desperation, they hadn't looked for jobs. They hadn't downsized. They had decided to cannibalize my credit score to keep the lights on for one more month. She's trying to fund the winter gala, I realized aloud. Tickets went on sale today. $500 a plate. She needs a table for 10 to maintain her standing on the committee. She was willing to commit a federal crime to buy a table at a party. Chloe stopped typing. She took her hands off the keyboard and looked at me. The warmth of friendship was gone from her eyes, replaced by the steel of legal counsel. Olivia, listen to me very carefully, she said. This isn't a civil dispute anymore. This isn't family drama. This is identity theft. It is wire fraud. It is a federal crime. I know, I said. You have two choices, Chloe continued, her voice hard. Choice A is you call the company, cancel the application, and tell them it was a mistake. You cover for her. But if you do that, you are accepting liability. You are telling the world that her debts are your debts. You are signing up to be their safety net forever. She leaned forward. Choice B is we report it as fraud. We file a police report right now. We send that report to the credit bureaus. It clears your record instantly. But once we file that report, it's out of your hands. The credit card company will pursue her. The district attorney will pursue her. She will be arrested. The room was silent. The city traffic below was just a hum. I looked at the application on my screen. I looked at the cease and desist letter on the desk. I thought about the 5 years of bills. I thought about the eviction toast. I thought about the smear campaign at the church. They had escalated every single time. When I paid, they demanded more. When I left, they slandered me. Now, they were trying to steal my financial future to buy centerpiece arrangements. If I stopped now, if I showed mercy, they would never stop eating me alive. They would drain me until I was as hollow as they were. I looked at Chloe. File the report, I said. Are you sure? She asked. There is no going back from this. I didn't commit the crime, Chloe.
She did.
I'm just the witness. I picked up my coffee cup. Call the police. 3 days later, the inevitable explosion occurred. It wasn't a phone call or a text message. It was a physical breach of my perimeter. I was sitting in the lobby of my new apartment building, a sleek high-rise with 24-hour security that I had moved into the day prior. I was going over the final details of the fraud report with Chloe when the commotion started at the front desk. You can't keep me from seeing my daughter." The voice was unmistakable. It was the boom of a man who had never been told no in his life. I looked up to see James pushing past the doorman, his face a mottled red, veins bulging in his neck. Angela was right behind him, looking less like an aristocrat and more like a cornered animal, her hair disheveled, her eyes darting around the lobby. They had found me. Sydney had warned me they might, but seeing them here, invading my sanctuary, triggered a spike of adrenaline. But it wasn't fear. It was the cold, sharp focus of a hunter watching prey walk into a trap. "Olivia!" James spotted me. He stormed across the marble floor, his footsteps echoing. "You ungrateful, vicious little." He stopped 10 feet away, not because he wanted to, but because the building security guard stepped in front of him. "Sir, step back," the guard ordered, his hand resting on his belt. "She's my daughter." James screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "And she's trying to destroy us. She cut off our money. She stole our future. She's a thief." People in the lobby, neighbors, delivery drivers, the concierge, stopped to watch. My mother seized the audience. She burst into tears, a performance I had seen 1,000 times. "We gave you everything," she wailed, clutching her purse. "We raised you. We loved you. And you report your own mother to the police? Over a misunderstanding? How could you be so cruel?" I stood up slowly. I smoothed the front of my blazer. I didn't look at the crowd. I looked directly at them. "It wasn't a misunderstanding, Angela," I said, my voice calm, carrying clearly across the silent lobby. "It was federal wire fraud and identity theft. It was for the family," James roared. "To save our reputation, which you have ruined." "The leasing company took the Rover this morning, Olivia. They took it right out of the driveway while the neighbors watched. Do you have any idea the humiliation?" "I imagine it felt a lot like being evicted at your own New Year's Eve party," I said. He lunged forward, but the guard held him back easily. James was weak, a paper tiger made of bluster and bad credit. "You're going to fix this," he spat. "You're going to call the bank. You're going to call the police and tell them it was a mistake. Or so help me God, I will make sure you never work in this city again." I looked at Chloe, who was sitting beside me. She nodded once and stood up. "James Vance," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "I represent Olivia, and you need to look behind you." James turned. 2 uniformed police officers were walking through the revolving doors. They weren't rushing. They didn't need to. They had the air of men who had already seen the evidence. Angela stopped crying instantly. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking gray and old. "What did you do?" she whispered. "I gave you a choice," I said, stepping forward until I was just out of reaching distance. "For years, I gave you a choice to treat me like a human being. You chose to treat me like an asset. Then, when I left, you chose to become criminals." I pulled a folder from my bag. "The officers are here because of the credit card application, Angela. That's a felony. Attempted grand larceny. You're looking at 5 to 10 years. Angela grabbed James's arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. "James, do something." But James was staring at the officers, his bluster evaporating into terror. He wasn't a fighter. He was a bully. And bullies crumble when the rules change. However, I continued, opening the folder. "I am willing to offer one final deal. A settlement." I held out a document. "This is a permanent no-contact order. It states that you will never contact me, speak to me, or come within 500 feet of me again. It states that you forfeit any claim to my finances, past or future. And it states that you admit, in writing, that the theft accusations were lies." I looked from one to the other. "Sign it, and I tell the officers I don't want to press charges. I tell them we're handling it as a civil matter. Refuse, and Angela leaves here in handcuffs." The officers stopped a few feet away, waiting. They knew the play. Chloe had arranged it perfectly. "You can't be serious," James hissed. "We're your parents." "Not anymore," I said. "Now you're just defendants. You have 10 seconds. Angela looked at the police, then at me. She saw the coldness in my eyes. She realized, finally, that the bank of Olivia was closed. There would be no more bailouts. No more mercy. "Give me the pen," she sobbed. She signed it against the lobby wall, her hand shaking so hard she tore the paper. James signed it next, refusing to look at me, his face a mask of impotent rage. Chloe took the document, checked the signatures, and nodded to the officers. They stepped back, relaxing their posture but keeping their eyes on James. "Get out," I said. "Olivia." My mother started, reaching a hand out. "Get out." They turned and walked toward the doors. They looked small. They looked defeated. They looked like exactly what they were, two people who had bet everything on a bluff and lost. I watched them go through the revolving glass, stepping out onto the sidewalk where their Uber, not a limo, not a luxury SUV, was waiting to take them back to a house they no longer owned. The security guard nodded to me. The neighbors went back to their business. I sat back down on the lobby sofa. My hands weren't shaking. My heart wasn't racing. It was just quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has finally, mercifully, blown itself out. 6 months later, I woke up early. Not because I had to, but because the sun was hitting my balcony and I wanted to watch the city wake up. I made coffee in my own kitchen, poured it into a mug I had bought just because I liked the color, and stepped outside. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Sydney. "Just finished my last exam. Packing up the dorm. See you tomorrow?" "Can't wait," I typed back. "Your room is ready." Sydney had moved in with me 3 months ago, right after she turned 18. We were splitting the rent on a 2-bedroom apartment that felt more like a home than the mansion ever had. She was going to college in the fall, studying psychology. She wanted to understand why people hurt the ones they're supposed to love. I told her she already had plenty of case study material. My parents were gone. Not dead, just gone from our lives. They had lost the house shortly after the lobby incident. The foreclosure was swift and brutal. They were living in a rental now, a small townhouse on the outskirts of the city. According to the grapevine, mostly Aunt Patricia, who still called occasionally to fish for gossip, James was blaming the economy for his downfall, and Angela was telling anyone who would listen that her ungrateful daughters had abandoned them. Let them talk. Their words couldn't reach me here. I checked my bank account. The balance was healthy. Growing. Every dollar in it was mine. Every cent represented hours of my life that I had reclaimed. I wasn't just saving money. I was saving myself. I sipped my coffee and looked out at the skyline. For a long time, I had felt guilty. I had wondered if I was too harsh, if I should have given them one more chance. But then I would remember the feeling of that invisible chain around my neck, the weight of their expectations dragging me down. And I realized that cutting them off wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of survival. I had spent 24 years trying to buy their love, trying to earn my place at their table. But you can't buy what isn't for sale. And you can't earn respect from people who only see you as a resource. I had to become the villain in their story to be the hero in mine. And you know what? I'm okay with that. Because for the first time in my life, the story belongs to me. So, to anyone out there who feels like they're drowning, who feels like they're setting themselves on fire to keep someone else warm, you don't have to stay. You don't have to pay the rent on a relationship that leaves you bankrupt. You can walk away. You can cut the cord. It will be scary. It will be messy. But on the other side of that fear is a quiet morning with a cup of coffee that tastes like freedom. If this story resonated with you, please share it. You never know who needs to hear that they have the power to walk away. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.